Welcome to our Natural Habitat Adventures presentation today, Adventures in the North, Aurora Borealis and Beyond, presented by Court Whalen, PhD, and he's coming to you live from our headquarters in Boulder, Colorado. Court's background in wildlife and conservation biology led him to pursue a joint PhD in ecotourism and entomology, while simultaneously coordinating and guiding small group wildlife experiences and ecotourism adventures around the world. From leading nature safaris to such far-flung places as Papua New Guinea and Madagascar, which I know he was just there, to locales closer to home such as Costa Rica, Belize, and Mexico, Court says his guiding experiences allow him to help people travel to and learn about extraordinary natural areas that make meaningful lifelong impressions for everyone involved. And in addition to a passion for discovery, teaching, and adventure, Court is also an avid nature and wildlife photographer and is always eager to share his knowledge and creative guidance with his guests. And no doubt some of the photos we're seeing today, I'm sure, are his. So, Court, so happy to be with you today and can't wait to hear all about Aurora Borealis. Welcome.
Well, Lee, thank you so much as always, and a warm welcome to those in the audience today from a slightly cooler day in Boulder, Colorado. I think this week might be the unofficial start to fall out here. And what gets me excited about fall is it's connected to winter, and what gets me excited to winter is we get great Aurora Borealis up in the north. It's the ideal time to see it. So yeah, in this presentation, it's Aurora Borealis and beyond. I'm really going to hit the beyond pretty hard because I think that we're talking about this expedition in particular. The Aurora Borealis and Northern Lights, they're fantastic, a huge cherry on top, but it's the beyond, it's this adventure this week in the north that I think really is, honestly, is some of the best takeaways from the adventure in the end. But we'll get into that here in just a bit. Without further ado, we'll launch into it. And yes, this photo is of the Aurora in the north, in Churchill, one of the world's best places to see the Northern Lights. And we'll talk about why here in the coming slides. So without further ado, just to put a face to the name, I also term this slide the curse of the photographer. So I am a nature photographer, and we rarely get in front of the camera. We're almost always behind. So here's one of those accidental photos where I was setting up a group shot on a tripod. I happened to take it too soon. I'm looking very befuddled into the camera because I didn't know I just took the shot. But yes, this is the one photo of me in Churchill in Northern Lights season. So there you go. That's me, hoodie and all. But here's another shot of me with my group. And this just tells it all. And it kind of hits a really poignant part of the talk today. Why in the world would you want to leave the comfort of your own home in the middle of winter and go to the Arctic tundra, not very far away from the Arctic Circle, where it's routinely, negative 20, negative 30, negative 40 degrees? Well, this is why. Photos like this and photos beyond this, the North has this beautiful austerity, both, at night, as we just saw, and in the daytime. It's not, like I just said, it's not just about the nighttime stuff. The daytime is absolutely spectacular. It's quite the landscape. But of course, the nighttime stuff is what we're certainly after, and seeing this beautiful spectacle of Aurora Borealis is such a huge incentive. But again, there are so many different times of day that I find fascinating and beautiful. The sunrises and sunsets, they're these slow Arctic sunrises and sunsets. They happen at very different times of day. So we can capture them with beautiful photographs, these oranges and yellows and pinks. We get some really cool weather phenomena up there. Even though the winter is really best for Aurora because of the general lack of blizzards, sometimes we might get one that sweeps through in a given day, and in 24 hours it's gone. But during that time, because we have this town basically to ourselves and we have all the tools available, we can get out there in relative comfort with our Arctic gear that we provide you over the course of the trip and see this and feel it, be part of this adventure in the north. It's absolutely spectacular. And even, on those rare cloudy nights, the photography can be absolutely beautiful. And this slide hits home or hits a certain point, not necessarily that our entire adventure is geared around outhouse photography, which it can be if you're really interested in that. But no, the gist is that even on those nights where, a rare cloudiness could occur, there's still so much to see that is just otherworldly. It's weird. It's different. It's not the stuff you're seeing normal days. You're seeing, huge snowbanks. You're seeing small stunted dwarfs, spruce forest. You're seeing legit outhouses in the north. This is, in certain residences, this is how it happens. You're seeing this kind of fainted moonlight in the distance and this blizzardy cloud overhead. It's really, really fascinating. But again, not just the nighttime stuff. In the daytime, even when it comes to atmospheric phenomena, of course, the aurora is the most sensational atmospheric phenomena we're going to hopefully see. But things like this in the day, I mean, look at this crazy scene that we see before us. This is the tundra. It is virtually all permafrost. We see small stunted trees here in the distance. Those trees may be 3, 4, 5 feet tall, but are 200 years old because this is such a harsh, inhospitable environment. But there's this rare beauty that can be seen. We have what's known as a sundog before us. This happens from a very specific kind of coordination of ice crystals in the atmosphere, generally the result of some high atmosphere winds blowing these very hexagonal, perfectly shaped ice crystals in the air, and it creates this prism-like reflection encircling the sun, and it can be absolutely spectacular on a nice clear day like this. And although a bit more rare, you have kind of the opposite of this. So you have sundogs during the day, and I call these, when you have a nice bright moon at night, a moon cat. I don't think that's the official term. I think they're just called moon dogs, but I think it's way more fun to say moon cat just because it's kind of the opposite. But anyway, it can be absolutely beautiful. And you also see little traces of the aurora, a little green on the left-hand side and the upper right. It can be really, really spectacular. Again, like 95% of what you're going to see and experience up there during this week is going to be totally new and mind-blowing for you. We routinely get folks from Florida, from California, even from Hawaii, from the Southeast, and places that are warm. This winter wonderland is such a beautiful, eye-opening experience for them as well. This is a good slide to talk quickly about. One of the first questions we often get, especially with photography, is, well, what about the moon phase? What am I aiming for? What about a full moon, a new moon, a quarter moon, a 3/4 moon? What are the pros and cons? I will say that both times in the moon cycle do happen over the course of our short season from about the end of January through the end of March. Both are good. Both offer merits. You can see here, there's a great example of how a big, bright, full-ish moon is actually stunning. I mean, it's spectacular. You can still see this happened to be a relatively weak aurora night, so don't use this as a bellwether for how bright the aurora will be with a moon. But you can see how having these kind of familiar celestial bodies actually provides a beautiful context to the scene. In addition, as you'll see by this next shot, a moon can actually offer some really great foreground lighting. This is basically in the middle of the night, 10, 11, 11:30 p.m. And the nice soft glow of the moon, which is behind me in this case, provides what we photographers call a diffuse lighting in front. And so these awesome spruce trees with this pillowy, duffy snow beneath are perfectly illuminated, and you can still see this really nice bright aurora above. So I happen to like the moon, especially with photography. The elephant in the room is that when you do have a big bright light in the sky, it is going to mute some things. The stars aren't going to be quite as crisp and as bright. If you do have a night that has a weaker aurora, you could see it a bit more faint in the sky. But there are merits to both times, and really, unless you're going during a dead full moon, you usually get a good part of the night that still has no moon at all, just because the moon cycle is on a little bit of a different calendar. We can go into more detail on that if you want to call in and ask us about the moon phase. But again, you can't really go wrong with any time that you're up here. The main thing to keep in mind is you want to go during the dead of winter, because you have these nice clear skies the majority of the time. I showed a few slides before with a little bit of clouds here and there, but that's the exception, not the norm. We like to go because it's so darn cold that it's too cold for precipitation to form and for clouds to form. So we often get very, very beautiful skies, blue skies day and night. But let's be real, the trip at the end of the day is really all about the sled dogs. That's the main focus. No, I kid, but they're definitely up there. They're waiting for you. Come greet Fido. It's an amazing experience to be mushing through the snow in these beautiful boreal forests with these amazing dogs. We'll get more into this in a little bit. So we're going to step back just a second and talk a little bit more about the aurora and actually the science behind it. I think it's pretty important to understand what's going on before you get involved in a trip like this. We'll absolutely talk more about this as we're seeing it in the flesh, as we're seeing the beautiful greens and yellows above us in the sky. But I think it's kind of fun to understand what in the world is going on. Why do we have aurora in the first place? And frankly, why, you know, the big question is when to go see it and where to go see it. So when we already talked about, you know, winter, January, February, March is fantastic in the Northern Hemisphere. But where to go see it? Well, this slide is, this is known as the Aurora Oval. It's a band of very high magnetic activity that encircles geomagnetic North Pole. And I want to point out something to you, you know, so basically what it comes down to is you want to be underneath this oval for the best chances of aurora activity. You know, coastal Russia, maybe not the best place to go see it. There's a lot of water you have to go through, just not a lot of accommodations up there. Iceland, pretty good. There are times where the Aurora Oval goes right over it, but there's a big body of water that surrounds it, i.e. the ocean there. And so you have a warm ocean mixed with cold interior climates. Clouds are likely to form. Same thing sometimes goes with Scandinavia, sometimes goes with southern Greenland. So I actually really prefer to be in kind of the middle of the North American continent. That's why Arctic Canada is so darn good. And where's Churchill? Well, it's right there on the edge of Hudson Bay. Now, before you go saying, well, I thought you said you don't want to be on water. At this time of year in the winter, that bay is totally frozen over, so it's a big ice block. It might as well be land. So as a result, when you're right underneath the oval, this is when you get really, really good zones of high magnetic activity. And just to give you kind of like a satellite view, what happens is as the Earth rotates into night, that zone right there kind of moves, and you're going to see as it goes around that southeastern part of Hudson Bay, it's going to be right over that western arm where Churchill is. So again, really, really good probability. In fact, Churchill, believe it or not, gets 300 nights of aurora a year. It's a pretty darn good place. So when you're thinking about a vacation, a trip, an adventure over the course of a week, what you really want to do is go to the place that's going to give you the highest chance. So when you are out for 3 or 4 nights, you're going to see it for not just 1, but potentially 2, 3, maybe even if you're really lucky, 4 nights. That would be fantastic. And again, this part of the world, you get this really, really high KP index, really high magnetic activity. So what's going on here? Well, it all starts with the sun. The sun is essentially a big ball of hydrogen. It's so hot, it's about 1 million degrees on the surface that it actually creates nuclear fusion and breaks apart the positive and negative ions of of hydrogen atoms. There's a little bit of helium too, but it's mostly hydrogen. And what happens, and you may be familiar with this, is you have solar flares and solar wind. It's so hot, explosions happen at the surface because it can't contain, even the massive gravity of the sun can't contain these explosions because there's so much energy. So these things erupt from the surface of the Earth in a very determined periodic cycle. We can talk about that in just a second. And they create solar wind. So this solar wind streams through the solar system and through the atmosphere, and it gets channeled along these magnetic lines in our magnetosphere. And those big bubbles going around Earth are known as Van Allen radiation belts, discovered not too long ago, amazingly, actually out of some sounding rockets from the Churchill area. So Churchill's long been known to be a great area for aurora, and a lot of the research, a lot of the stuff we know about aurora was actually discovered in part by tests and rockets going up out of Churchill. And we can actually see the old rocket range at the Northern Study Center when we're up there together. It's really, really fascinating. Anyway, I digress. What happens is a solar wind is basically just a mixture of very, very basic particles like protons, electrons, neutrons, just streaming towards the Earth, and they get channeled down because of our magnetosphere around these 2 ovals. We know that there is an oval in the north and in the south. Aurora Borealis, the northern lights, Aurora Australis, the southern lights. They are more or less mirror images of one another. Because of where land is, essentially, you get a much, much higher chance and much easier chance of seeing aurora in the north. I'm not going to go into too much on the Aurora Australis, but you see it's a magnet, it's a pole. You've got 2 sides of the Earth and they stream down. Then what happens is as they enter our atmosphere, they bombard oxygen particles and explode. The oxygen particles explode because you're getting hit by these little, small, like if you were to have a baseball, which is the oxygen particle, that baseball is getting hit sandblasted with little tiny grains of sand. Those are the electrons and protons just bombarding it. And the way that it explodes and releases energy in the form of light. It also releases energy in terms of pure energy. In fact, the aurora phenomenon is known as a magnetosphere generator. It produces and yields over 10 million megawatts. The largest power generator in the world, just to give you some perspective of how powerful this really is, what we're actually seeing in the atmosphere, 10 million megawatts by the Aurora, the largest power generator in the world, is 1,000 megawatts. So it's such a privilege and so beautiful to be underneath these dancing lights where, you know, we're miles, you know, dozens and dozens of miles away, to see what is happening in the atmosphere that is generating a ton of power from things that are originating from the sun, you know, miles and miles and miles away, entering our atmosphere and putting on nature's greatest fireworks show. It's pretty fantastic. That was pretty heavy. Here's your palate cleanser, little Arctic Fox kit, little baby Arctic Fox, just to clear the mind, deep breath. That was a lot of science. We're right back into a little bit of science here. Okay, hang with me, folks. So we're talking about the vertical column of our atmosphere. We started about 60 miles on the very bottom. It goes all the way up above 300 miles. So I mentioned oxygen is a predominant particle that gets bombarded with these particles. When high altitude isotopic oxygen gets hit, it turns into red. Most of the oxygen is at that mid-level. When it explodes, it releases green light. In the very, very bottom of the aurora, we're very, very down on that curtain-looking thing, there's some nitrogen that explodes and turns into pink. So really, when it comes down to it, there are three primary colors of the aurora. You've got red, which is albeit quite rare, but sometimes you can see it, you know, in the very, very top part. But we're talking about 300 miles above the Earth's surface, so the perspective is a little bit skewed. Mostly it's going to be green, and on really cranking nights, you're going to see that nitrogen on the very bottom of the curtain. And it's this really cool layer cake. Also, you'll notice if you look at the very, very bottom of this slide, that little plane that's flying over a mountain, you know, that's a jet plane which cruises at, you know, 30, 40,000 feet, and then Mount Everest, which is like 29,000 feet. So the aurora starts way, way above that. It doesn't look like it. When we're actually seeing it with our naked eye, it looks like it's coming down right toward us. It's right there, but it's actually far above the atmosphere, and most importantly, far above clouds. So remember what I was talking about before about, you know, if you don't want clouds, you want to go during the winter, you want to go inland, you want to get away from things that can produce clouds. The reason is that if you have clouds in the way, you're just not going to see the aurora, plain and simple. So the science behind finding it is, A, you've got a good place and you got to have, you know, somewhat decent infrastructure. And we'll talk about Churchill's very adequate infrastructure on that. But mainly it's to avoid clouds is really the key takeaway from that. Fun fact, you can actually tell the major composition of atmosphere of different planets because of the color of their aurora. So here we have kind of a pink purple aurora. Nitrogen and helium predominates in that atmosphere. So kind of cool. It's actually a great way for NASA scientists, they've stated, to find potentially life on other planets. If you see a green aurora on a planet in a different solar system, a different galaxy, what do you think that means? There's oxygen in the atmosphere. Time to go looking. So yeah, it's kind of fun how it all connects together. Couple slides of what the aurora is not like. So I mentioned, you know, you've got to set your expectations, and there are a lot of images, more and more every day, of people that have created Photoshop works of art, or literally just, you know, pieces of paper with crayons and colored pencils or oil paint, and they create all these colors of these magentas and these oranges and, you know, blues, and like frankly, you know, it's mostly green. You know, that's not an aurora. This is really not an accurate aurora. They're bringing out colors that don't exist there. But, you know, this is to help set expectations, but it doesn't mean the aurora is not spectacular. I mean, look at how amazing this is when you have those different shades of yellows and greens. This is what the aurora looks like. And then just a quick call back to what we were talking about before, when you have that moon in the photo, I think there's something about having that familiar celestial body that kind of provides context. Really, it just makes it more worldly when you're seeing something very otherworldly. I like it a lot to have that there. Another shot here of aurora kind of dancing over the Hudson Bay, almost like specters, like ghosts in the distance. You can kind of see the start of these kind of curtain-like effects as waving. And now's the time to go into, again, real briefly, we'll talk about more science before we go into kind of just the trip itself, the itinerary, the day-to-day stuff. You have 4 different types of auroras. The first, it kind of goes sequentially from top to bottom in level of activity. So when the sun really gets cranking and there's a lot of explosions at the surface, you get more dramatic substorms, as it's called, SUVs, substorms. And that's when a lot of particles are streaming towards Earth. They stream literally at 1 million miles an hour, and they reach the Earth in about 1 to 3 days. We can predict that, which is really, really darn cool. And as it gets more and more intense, that aurora dances, it moves, it gets more activity. It starts from the top as this what's known as a homogeneous arc, a very diffuse, almost like a faint green, kind of whitish cloud, and gets more and more vibrant, more striated. You can see what's known as a rayed arc in that second one, the curtain effect, third one down, and then the full corona, the fourth one down, and that's where it's like really streaming overhead, and you can see the swirl, almost like this cinnamon roll kind of look to it. It's pretty fantastic. And I will mention real quickly, because I've already talked about the solar aspect where it's shooting the solar wind away from the sun. We are entering what most scientists predict and believe to be solar cycle 25. There is an 11-year cycle of solar activity. We don't entirely know why, but about every 11 years you get a peak of solar activity. Also every 11 years you get a trough of solar activity. We are just coming out of that trough right now and ascending to a new height, basically, where solar activity is expected to pick up more and more. So I can't wait to see what this aurora season is going to be like, because I think it's going to be really, really banging. Very excited. Now, I will say, for those people that are saying, oh gosh, well, I don't even want to go close to a trough, the reason I don't mention it all that seriously is because when you're in the right place, i.e. Churchill, i.e. right around that Aurora Oval, you don't have to be so concerned about what year you're in, where in this quote unquote solar cycle, this 11-year cycle. That mostly pertains to areas outside of that Aurora Oval. You probably have heard you can see northern lights in Winnipeg. You can see northern lights in Minnesota. Sometimes they're visible in Chicago. They're even visible in Hawaii sometimes, really cranking years. That's when that 11-year cycle comes into play. When you're directly underneath the Aurora Oval, it's going to be great at any time, in any cycle, really in any day that you don't have clouds, basically. So anyway, moving on to kind of what those things look like. Here's that first homogeneous arc, very diffuse, kind of looks like a cloud. This is the first thing we look for. So you'll see me out there. I'll be looking in the sky. I'll be scanning. We start to see the green. We start to see a bigger cloud. It's got a certain shape to it. You can also see a little bit of that fringe of pink on the very bottom right. Not real pronounced, but it is there. You get the rayed arc, a little bit of that red on top. You can see the streaming. You can almost visualize those little tiny particles streaming towards Earth and bombarding oxygen. You know, those are those particles hitting and exploding oxygen, emitting that green light with red light above it. Then when it gets really cranking, this is the most fun. This is the curtain effect. And this is when we get good auroras, this is what you can expect and hope to see. It's moving in front of our very eyes. We don't even need a time-lapse camera. It's moving and waving and shape-shifting. We're getting some of that pink on the bottom and some of that red up top. It's hard to tell via perspective. Again, we're looking at, you know, in this entire frame, we're looking at 60 to 320 miles above the Earth's surface. So there's a lot of area we're actually scanning here. But when it all comes together, it's absolutely spectacular. And if you're really lucky, the aurora as a thin band will pass right overhead, which it often does in Churchill, and you get this full corona effect. And how spectacular is that? I mean, it really, again, it's hard. You got to pinch yourself. It's hard to believe you're actually seeing this stuff when you do so. It's extraordinary. So anyway, the aurora is a lot of fun. It's one of the most exquisite things to see. So let's talk about how we're going to get you to see it. Well, all of our trips start and end in Winnipeg at the historic Fort Garry Hotel, which is a really cool place. This is actually Fort Garry in fall. In the winter, it's a little bit more white on the ground. There's some snow that sticks around. But it's a beautiful historic railway hotel. Great place to start and end the trip. So flying into Winnipeg, it's very easy to get there. The major hubs in the U.S. are Denver, Chicago, Minneapolis. So a lot of direct flights, and then the flights that connect you to get there are pretty easy as well. We then take a charter flight up to Churchill. It's about 2.5+ hours. We are on our own planes that we do charter, so it makes it nice and easy and convenient to get up there. And then we get up to Churchill. Wait, wrong slide. That's a little bit of Arctic humor for you there. That's Churchill. That's the one we all know and love. No, but I kid, but I actually, I'll be honest, if given the choice of a tropical beach in Solomon Islands versus Churchill, although it may seem a little bit more arid and desolate, I love this place, and I know that you will too. And this is where we get into that beyond part of things. I love the aurora. It's one of my most treasured memories year to year and treasured photographs. But just the vibe of being in the north, and the real deal in north for a week, is something really, really special. It's gorgeous. It's absolutely beautiful. Town is small. We're out of town in about 2.5 minutes, and we're getting into these beautiful Arctic winter wonderland scenes. It's spectacular, and I love this time of year because you can just walk around and take photos of almost anything. Again, we have these beautiful open barren lands. We have nice clear skies and floating ice crystals for these beautiful sundogs and boreal forest. Churchill is really unique in that it's the confluence of 3 major biomes. You have the boreal forest to the south, which is arguably one of the largest tracts of boreal forest in the world. It meets up in Churchill, where it starts getting a little bit thinner, and you can see by this next photo here that it gets into what's known as discontinuous permafrost, and therefore discontinuous boreal forest. You can see the real thick boreal forest in the background, but right in the town of Churchill, it starts getting a lot more spread out. So it gets this really unique kind of Arctic tundra vibe. And as soon as we turn around in one more direction, you get big, flat, barren areas like this. So photographers absolutely love it. I would say even, the Aurora aside, photographing Churchill in the winter is something truly, truly wonderful. And there's so many places we can take photos out of town. This is just, we're literally pulled off the side of the road, and we can see these beautiful little black and white spruce trees with that interesting Krumholtz effect, where you can see that prevailing wind coming so strong from the right-hand side, blasting all those branches and fir needles off with the ice and wind and little particles. So just, again, very, very interesting, very otherworldly. The town of Churchill has so many scenes, so many Inukshuks. I love playing a game with my guests to see how many Inukshuks, how many traditional Inuit sculptures like this can you see over the course of our 6 or 7 days up there. There are many, and they're all photogenic. Even some of the old hotels that are not even operational anymore, like the Iceberg Inn here, totally snowed in. I mean, you're photographing interesting scenes constantly and observing them. So I love walking around, and like I said, even though rare, usually once a season we'll get a chance to see a real Arctic blizzard. And although it might keep us from seeing the aurora for one night, seeing these daytime scenes and being in the real deal Mother Nature wilderness is pretty breathtaking. But at the end of the day, like I said, obviously the lights are the focus. So we do structure our time a bit differently than your average trip. So what it is, we sleep in every day because we're usually up fairly late at night. And when I say fairly late, we usually aim to see the aurora, keeping fingers crossed, anywhere from 9 to 11 p.m. Sometimes we have to stay out later. Sometimes we're out till midnight. We'll always offer one of our vehicles to head back, into town. We'll take, one of our drivers, and you'll head back into town if you feel like calling it quits. Maybe it came out early and we're just waiting for the second show. But we do tend to stay up kind of late. 11 p.m. is usually a little bit on the later side for most folks. So we don't start our days until 10 or 11 the next morning, usually with a morning program. And then the afternoons are where we get into some really fun northern stuff. And I'll go into details on that in a second before we go into aurora viewing stuff at nighttime. We always have a new interesting place to see aurora from each and every night, which adds, I mentioned before about that really nice, fun infrastructure that Churchill provides. There's different stuff to see, different angles to view and photograph and enjoy, different warming huts, different kinds of hot chocolate and Bailey's combinations. I'm telling you, there's a lot of variety on this trip that we provide for you guys. Before I continue on, I want to comment real quickly on photography. This is always one of the questions I get towards the end of the presentation today, and in just a few minutes we will take questions from you guys, so you're fully up to know and get all your questions answered. It's one of the easiest yet most difficult types of photography there is. I recommend going to our website, naturalphotographer.org. It's a website I'm editor-in-chief of, and it's everything nature and wildlife and travel photography tips. I do a lot of articles and a lot of tutorials on Northern Lights photography. So definitely get there for play-by-play instructions. We also have a number of photo trips each and every year where you have an expedition leader, a photo expedition leader, just like myself, or myself in some cases. I usually guide a couple of these trips every year, where you have hands-on expertise from start to finish. If you're new to photography, if you're new to night photography, we're here to help. We will make sure you get extraordinary shots of the Aurora Borealis and everything else. But the real, the nitty-gritty, people often ask, well, gosh, what kind of camera do I need to have? Generally, you need to have something that does have interchangeable lenses, mainly because those equate to the most customization, most manual settings you can do. Wide lenses for a crop frame camera, somewhere in the 10 to 22 millimeter range, 16 to 35 for full frame, a fast lens, f2.8, but f4 is okay. think about long shutter speed, so tripods are a must. We do provide tripods in this trip if you don't have a good one, and then high ISOs. I know, a lot of folks in this presentation may not be real ardent photographers, so let me stress that you do not have to be a photographer to absolutely be thrilled with this trip. But I did want to put this out there because it kind of helps put some words on the presentation so you can take away, especially for any of the replays you might want to watch if you do choose to join us on this trip. Anyway, so with all those instructions, you will get some great shots on this trip. And again, for those folks that don't have a camera, don't want to bother with that, just sitting back and relaxing and letting those photographers, letting your expedition leader take photos of the trip is a pretty great way to preserve the memory too. So this gets into, how are we seeing the aurora? Well, again, every night, we're going to have dinner. We're going to be done with dinner around 7:30, 8 p.m. And as soon as it's dark, we're going to go out and we're going to see the aurora. This is one of my favorite aurora viewing destinations. This is about 1 minute from town, about 1 minute drive from our hotel. This is on the edge of Hudson Bay. This is one of those nookshuks. A nookshuk is basically an Inuit way of giving some sort of significance to an area. There are about 19 different ways these things are used, from pointing to various hunting grounds, or maybe a symbol for this is where we left our kayaks, or hey, this is a fence to herd the caribou. But basically this is a massive one. It stands probably about 20, 25 feet tall, just on the edge of Hudson Bay. And it's a beautiful foreground element for photographs and viewing. And again, it's very close to town. So after we see it, we're back right in our cozy rooms if you want to be. But we do venture further off. The other thing, this is one of our newer additions to the fleet, so to speak, of aurora viewing destinations, is the Aurora Pot. This is something we custom built, Aurora Pot, P-O-D. It's essentially like it almost looks like a shipping container. It's not. It was very purpose-specific built, but it's like the size of a container that is rolled out on the edge of the boreal forest in the darkness for perfect viewing, but also a nice little warming hut where while we're waiting for the aurora to come out, we've got nice chairs, we've got a little presentation space. We can talk about Arctic life and culture. We can talk about maybe photo tips if we're on a photo trip. You can see some nice snacks there on the left-hand side, some cookies and crackers and desserts for after dinner, a nice stove, a pellet stove there. So it stays nice and toasty in there. You can wait for the aurora to come out. You'll see it out there, and then one door, and you're outside in perfect viewing location. You can wander off a little bit in each direction to photograph through the trees. It's really, really quite nice. Let me introduce you to a whole new thing that we're rolling out for this coming season, a rendition of it, because this is being built as we speak, the Aurora Cabin Experience. We were building this in the Boreal Forest as well. We're custom designing this large snow coach modeled after the Yellowstone snow coaches, if you've done a Yellowstone trip in the winter. Big monster truck tires that can safely and sustainably go over the snow, minimal impact, and get us out to this very semi-far off viewing location where we have a nice catered dinner. We can wait for the aurora, and then right outside the aurora displays, and again, we're in perfect viewing and photographic position. Another one of my personal favorites is going to be, we call this Dave's Teepee. Dave is one of the local dog mushers. So just to my right, here I am. This is a self-timed photo on a tripod. So yours truly there. Dave's dog yard, his dog mushing yard, is just off to the right, and the dogs, it's just the coolest thing when the aurora really goes off. They take notice. They're animals, they're sentient beings, they're observant. They've, in a lot of ways been on this earth a lot longer than we have, and been seeing this a lot more than we have, and they'll start howling. And here you have this beautiful otherworldly green spectacle of an aurora ahead, above you, and then these dogs, these sled dogs, howling in the background. I mean, it's like this eerie, mythical. It's you just got to be there. Join me. Come on up, and we'll see it together. We'll have this experience together. It's one of my favorite places to, again, view and photograph the aurora. It's really, really cool. But sometimes, frankly, it's not that well planned. We might be cruising down the highway in town, the 2-lane road here, and the aurora really starts kicking, and we say, all right, time to pull over. Here we go. This is the show. It's happening. And of course, we might get back in the vehicle and go to one of these viewing locations and have even greater shows later in the night. But you can see it anytime, anywhere. So we're always ready to kind of carp the DM and seize the adventure here. Cool shot of us here back in that Inukshuk area on the edge of Hudson Bay, the aurora overhead. Great for holiday photos for the coming year. You can see us here bundled up in our Arctic gear. Probably a good time to quickly chat about Arctic gear. We provide you with, gosh, pretty much everything. All you really need to think about is your layers underneath. We have great Arctic parkas, great snow pants, great snow boots. These things are rated down into the real deal negatives. The main things I recommend to think about, again, we get a lot of people from Southern California, a lot of people from Florida, a lot of people that, there's no reason you would ever have an Arctic parka rated to -40 degrees. So just think about, the sweaters, the sweatshirts, the long underwear, good scarf, good wool hat, and that's pretty much it. Certainly give us a call, talk to one of our adventure specialists here if you want to get more information on all that. But the great thing is you don't have to think about going out and spending hundreds or even thousands of dollars on the gear. We provide you from pretty much everything from start to finish. So sled dogs, this is another one of the great things that we do over the course of the trip, and one of my real highlights, one of my real favorites. The ride on a sled with the dogs is pretty short, just to be frank. It's about 10 or 15 minutes. It's about a mile, but it's a great experience. What my favorite part is being with the dogs, interacting with them, seeing those icy blue eyes, seeing how happy they are. These are working dogs. This is what they do. This is what they love. They're so enthusiastic. You walk in the dog yard, and if you think the howling, was interesting when you see the Aurora with them, I mean, just wait until you greet them to go mushing for the day. I mean, they're jumping up and down. They can't wait to see you. They're pulling at their chains. They're ready to go. And of course, we get them outfitted. We get them with their little snow booties. And I mean, those are happy dogs. I'll show you pictures from happy dogs right here. It is so fun. But again, my favorite part is really just the interaction, cuddling with these gentle giants. It's really fun. So this is one of those daytime activities. It's not that we're just doing nothing, twiddling our thumbs, waiting for night to take place. We're out there doing stuff. We're seeing stuff. We're experiencing stuff. So every afternoon we have an activity, and they're diverse and they're pretty interesting. So this is just one of them. We also go to a great place. As a scientist myself, I've spent a lot of times in research stations around the world, and this is a really cool research station. It's the Churchill Northern Studies Center. It's at the very end of the road, about 30 minutes out of town. It's a beautiful drive out here, and it's kind of the real deal Arctic study center. I mean, this is cutting edge. It was designed only a few years ago. It's LEED certified. It's ultra sustainable. It's fascinating to take a tour and walk around, see the research being done. We often stay there or come back out there at night sometimes. It's a great place to view the aurora. As you can see, dancing over the sky there. Really cool to kind of get some context in the foreground if you are a photographer. You can see that dome on the left-hand side, that little glass bubble. Great place to sit and wait for it to come out, watch for it, be mindful, keep your eyes out, and then as soon as it's ready and it's going off, you can come out and get it with your naked eyes or your camera. It's pretty fantastic. But again, touring around and seeing what they're doing, so much of what we know about Arctic critters, Arctic fox, polar bear, ptarmigan, Arctic hare, Arctic ecology, marine ecology in the Hudson Bay, undersea ice ecology is coming from this state-of-the-art institution. So getting a chance to walk around and kind of spend, an hour in the life of a researcher is pretty fun and engaging. Also, while we're here, we get a cool opportunity to build an igloo. If you've never built an igloo, a lot of what they do up there is snow science. Again, it's not like we just came into this world understanding the composition of snow and how it mixes with elements and what it takes to compact snow and so on and so forth. We learn so by doing, and these guys are pretty cutting edges to understanding how avalanches are formed, different layers of snow, et cetera, et cetera. And we get a chance to build an igloo as a group. You can see how we're quite bundled up. You get in the igloo, get some, again, great photos. And you can see they're small. They're designed that way because they're supposed to trap in heat. You can kind of see what it's like if you were living in that. We don't spend the night out there, much to people's chagrin. I don't think you'd want to spend the night out there, but you really could. I can say you instantly get in there, and if it's a really bitterly cold day, like in the -20, 30, 40s, you get in there and it's like 40 degrees warmer, just because any little shred of body heat you exude warms this place up tremendously. It's pretty extraordinary. Another one of the great activities we do as part of the trip is curling, the great northern activity. This is not one of our groups. This is just when I went on Google Images and said old-timey curling photo, but this is what they used to do. We do so in a proper curling rink. And it's funny when you see and experience this town of about 400 or 500 people, one small general store, a couple small hotels, a couple small restaurants, again, 400 or 500 people, you think, well, what is their curling rink going to look like? It is state of the art. Let me tell you, this is the thing to do, and we get to experience it with them. And it makes for a lot of happy folks. It's quite a bit of fun. So, at the end of the day, this trip makes people extremely happy. It's a wonderful trip. I often get the question as an expedition leader, a worldwide expedition leader, what is your favorite trip in the world? And it's really hard to answer that question. I've got, as Lee was saying in the intro, I guided Madagascar and Costa Rica and Galapagos and for monarch butterflies, all places I absolutely love. But, there's something really special about this trip. This is not your quintessential wildlife trip. But as far as the nature goes, as far as the, seeing, learning, and experiencing something in the world that you would otherwise never do. This goes for Arctic culture, northern ecology and environments, and of course the Aurora Borealis. It's a pretty extraordinary trip, and it really is easily on the tippy top of my list of favorite trips that we do here at Natural Habitat Adventures. So I'll leave you with one of my favorite photos here of the Aurora dancing. This is, I think it might have been on St. Patrick's Day, which is pretty cool. The green coming down from the sky on St. Patty's Day. And then, of course, I want to thank you guys for your attention, and I am here to happily answer any questions that you may have about the trip.
Okay, thank you, Court. Fantastic. And we've got some great questions here. Everyone, if you have a question, now would be the time to send it in, and we are going to take a few moments and answer some of your questions. So, Court, this question is a popular one. Do you have any particular warnings for gear given the temperatures? I know some phones don't like it. So how do you handle your gear in the lower temperatures?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are a few different ways to answer, a few different tips and tricks. Frankly, the easiest is, it sounds basic, but it is just keep like your phone and spare camera batteries just in your pocket. You're probably gonna have like some long underwear underneath and like some snow pants on the outside. If you have an interior pocket, or if you just put them in your snow pants pocket, it's gonna be next to your body heat, and it's gonna stay warm enough that it won't die immediately. I've actually not really had any problems with it. I even leave my camera out because I don't want to bring it back inside each time and set up the shot every time. I'll leave my camera out for 30, 45 minutes, and amazingly nowadays batteries are so darn good. As long as you're not using it for those 45 minutes and it's just sitting waiting for the next photo, the batteries last pretty well. Now, that all being said, when it does come down to cameras, I do recommend bringing a couple spare batteries because, over the course of 3 or 4 hours, you may need to change batteries, that is. But yeah, it's actually, I guess, the most satisfying thing that you may get to hear here is that you don't really need any special considerations for gear. Just keeping it in your pocket opposed to an outer pocket of a backpack or something is really all you need to do. But that does raise maybe a more important point of like how much exposure are you really going to have to the cold. It's really as much as you want. You saw every single one of these venues, so to speak, that we're viewing the Aurora from, even when we're building igloos, even when we're outside, photographing sundogs. There's always a warming hut. There's always a building nearby that you can get in. There's always a vehicle that's warmed and heated. So while we provide you the gear to be outside of as long as you want comfortably, you're never, too far away. I mean, really, you're a matter of yards away, feet away from the entrance of a nice building that you can get a little bit of warmth from.
Oh, good. Well, there was another question about sort of the cold that indirectly, I guess, does NatHab provide the goggles?
No, we don't. That's one of the things we may start providing those in coming years, but they are a bit person specific, especially if you have, contact lenses versus prescription glasses versus the size of your face versus the amount of tinting that you want. They are not required. You can do the trip just fine. If it is bitterly cold, I do recommend them. And my best advice is, if you are a skier, just bring whatever you normally use. If you don't have them, it's worth the $20 for a really cheap pair. You're not using them a lot. Like, you definitely don't need them every time you walk outside of the hotel, to the bus, to a restaurant, to a venue, et cetera, et cetera. It's really when there are a handful of times. One is when you're dog sledding, you kind of want to be outside, interacting with the dogs. When you're igloo building, that's another time. When you're actually viewing the Aurora, you don't really want them on. You don't want anything in front of your eyes. You want to view that in all its glory. So you do not need, unless you already have them, you do not need a really fancy, expensive pair. A very cheap pair is just fine.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Court. What about age limit? Do you have an age limit for guests? This particular person is thinking about scouts and venture crews, so sort of maybe late teens, young adult type group.
Yeah, that age would be great. Generally, as a company, we have an age limit, so to speak, of 12. Not so much because there's any inherent danger. It's more of like for group composition. Most of our travelers in general are, I would say, closer to their retirement years, more or less, 55 to 75. And so, younger folks are not a commonality on our trips, but we do have them on occasion. We tend to want to chat with the person, the parent, the guardian, mainly to make sure that they're ready for the content of the trip. These are learning adventures. These are, we will have lectures and discussions and so on and so forth. I would say this is a pretty good one because we can get out of the vehicles, we can walk around, we can keep energy levels high. But yeah, I would say that my recommendation is to take this on a somewhat case-by-case basis. But yeah, we do not have a hard and fast age range up until 12. Yeah, below 12, we really need to, get the folks more on like a family departure, and just give us a call and we can talk you through how all that happens.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So what about a person with limited mobility? Would they enjoy this trip?
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of hiking and walking on this trip. I mean, you can walk around town if you prefer not to be in the bus, but because of the cold, we have vehicles to take you everywhere. The most kind of dangerous, and I'm doing air quotes right now, most dangerous part is just the fact that the ground is going to be like not icy, but snowy. Nobody would be able to walk around if everything was iced over completely, but it can be slick. I will tell you that the boots we give you have really good traction on the bottom. They're like snow tires for your feet. So you want to be able to walk around. I would say, our physical requirements on our website, or give us a call, email us, and we'd be happy to send you over our little blurb on kind of the minimum. We generally say you want to be able to walk over icy terrain. You want to be able to walk, maybe up to a mile. You really don't need to on this trip. But that kind of is a symbol for being able to get around when need be. But I would say it's a low physicality level trip because we are being shuttled from place to place. It's really just a matter of standing outside, being able to deal with the cold to properly enjoy yourself. And I would say if you do have concerns, give us a call and we can talk you through some real specifics of what your individual concerns are. And I would say 9 times out of 10, you'll be all right.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Very good. Thanks. All right. I know that we touched on polar bear trips. We know those are October, or those are, the late fall, and then we get into the Aurora trips more in the winter months. So, but there are questions about whether you would see polar bears during these Aurora trips.
Yeah, that's a great question. In some ways, I'd like to say I hope so, but there's basically a 0% chance. At this time of year, the reason why we're able to be outside and walking around and it is safe is because the bears, come the end of November and beginning of December, they take off for the ice vehemently. They've been fasting ever since July or August, so they cannot wait to get back on the ice because the ice is in the platform on which they hunt. They wait at seal breathing holes out on the ice, so there's quite literally nothing for them on land once there's ice in the bay. So, we obviously as expedition leaders are always mindful of that, and we keep close communications with the parks officials, with the conservation officials, with the wildlife rangers in the area to know if there have been any signs. But no, I would say probably your question more pertains to the hopeful chance of seeing them. Unfortunately not. Yeah. But on the flip side, what that does is allows us amazing mobility, and allows us amazing opportunities to get out on the tundra and do things that we wouldn't be able to do during polar bear season, just, a couple months prior.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Thanks, Court. All righty. Well, this has been fabulous, and I think we are close to finish. Let's see. There was a question here. One more question. I am not seeing it. Kendall, what was the other question? Let's see. Let's see if we can get her to unmute herself and tell us, because she's been tagging questions for me. All right.
The popular question is, on our polar bear trips in November and October, will there be a chance of seeing auroras?
Oh, okay. So
Oh,
the flip side of that question, yeah, also a great question. Um, a better chance, yeah, not zero like it would be for the other way around. It's really hard to even put a number of your percentage chance, but I know that kind of helps frame your mind around the chance. Let's say it's a 10 to 20% chance of seeing aurora in polar bear season. But so here's the explanation. Churchill it's just as fantastic of an area. There still is aurora happening, like I said, 300 nights out of the year. But polar bear season, and if you're going to go up there, what you'll see is it's fall. It's when the majority of winter weather is rolling through, and thus it's very cloudy. Remember, clouds are the enemy for aurora. So we don't go there during polar bear season with the hope or the expressed plan of seeing aurora. But rest assured, if it does show itself, if it is a clear night, there's a really good chance, actually. The problem is the chance of the clear night is extremely low. But what we have is, you'll actually notice this if you join us on a polar bear trip, is every single hotel room, whether it's in town, whether it's in our Tundra Lodge, has a little sign on the door. It's like a do not disturb sign, but instead it says, please do disturb if there's aurora. So what you do is if you want to get woken up in the middle of the night, you go to bed at 9 or 9, 9:30, 10 o'clock, whatever. If you want to get woken up at 10:30, 11, 11:30, whatever time of night that our expedition leaders happen to go out and check and see the aurora, yeah, you can, and we'll get you outside. If you're staying in town, it's pretty funny, but you can absolutely throw on your parkas on top of your PJs. You can go outside, you can see the aurora. If there's enough activity of the aurora, we'll safely get you down to a certain viewing area that we have set aside that is safe at that time of year during polar bear season, and it's possible. So if you are a photographer, what that does is that says maybe on the off chance that you do see aurora, you should pack a tripod for a polar bear trip. Of course, we're not really getting too detailed in this presentation on like gear for polar bear trips, but that's, in my humble opinion, the only time I'd say a tripod is really necessary during that season, because there is that small chance. Again, go into it knowing it's a small chance, but keep your fingers and toes crossed for a clear night. Our expedition leaders will, be setting their alarm clocks between the group, every hour to go check, because we want to see them just as badly as you do. It's fantastic to see them. So yeah, there's a chance.
good. Okay, terrific. All right, Court. Well, with that, we will stop with the questions. I am going to turn it back to you for closing comments, and we'll collect the rest of the questions and get back individually for those that we weren't able to answer. So, Court, over to you.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Lee. And thank you to all of you that stayed and hung in there throughout all the nitty-gritty science and the itinerary details. I can say right before I jumped into this presentation, I checked current availability for our Northern Lights trips, and we do have some availability throughout this coming season. So I got to say, with the uptick in aurora activity expected, there's no time like the present to get up there. It's expected to be a great season. So I'd love to see you up there. Give us a call, ask questions, see what we can do for you. If you're already booked on a trip, I'd love to see you up there too. So thank you so much for your attention, and we appreciate it.
Yep, my thanks as well. This has been terrific. We will get the replay out to all of you. Look for it coming your way in an email. So with that, we will say good day and conclude the webinar. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.